In the wake of the Boston bombings, there's one aspect of the media's coverage that I haven't talked about, the sensationalistic machine that's pumping out fear, racism, and discrimination against one group, Muslims. Take a look.
I don't care if she knew about this. She ought to be in prison for wearing a hijab. This immigration policy of us assimilating immigrants into our culture isn't really working. No, they're assimilating us into their culture. She got a clitorectomy, too?
Who else does that? What other theology in this world justifies murdering innocent people? The answer is only radical Islam allows terror murder.
There are some who are getting very leery of all the Muslim students in America. Our own Bob Eckel among those, saying maybe stop granting them visas. Others have spoken of slowing down the number of get into this country, checking them out more closely.
Let me just say this about the access that Muslims have in this country, whether they're American Muslims or whether they're here on a student visa. It is enormous, the access that they have, and it is virtually all radical.
Yes, I know that was all mostly Fox News, but the sentiment of Islamophobia is being echoed across the political and media establishment alike, and has been since 9/11. This kind of rhetoric toxifies the public's perception of the fastest growing religion in the world, one that's inherently peaceful. And unfortunately, this mindset does nothing more than incite hatred and violence against a growing population. So, here to talk about the culture of Islamophobia and what we can do to combat this mindset going forward, I'm joined now by Arsalan Iftikhar, senior editor for the Islamic Monthly and founder of the MuslimGuide.com. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Abby.
So, why is it that when white people go on a shooting spree, it's an aberration? It's considered that they're mentally ill. Yet, when there's a Muslim with a bomb, that is just exclusively terrorism.
It's because, Abby, the term terrorism has been co-opted after September 11th to really only apply when brown Muslim dudes commit an act of terror. You know, in the last year, we've seen the Newtown, Connecticut school shooting. We saw the Aurora, Colorado Dark Night movie massacre. In all of those cases, it was just a white kooky loner that was doing it. Less than a year ago also, we had a white supremacist named Wade Michael Page who walked into a Sikh Gurdwara temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and slaughtered 6 people in cold blood. And he had a race war ideology, but the term domestic terrorism was rarely used. I assure you, if it was a brown dude who walked into a white church in Wisconsin and killed 6 innocent people, regardless of his political ideology, he would have been referred to as a terrorist.
And also, just there's been multiple bombings of abortion clinics by right-wing Christians. We don't hear them. We don't hear people really talking about that as terrorism either. It's really fascinating. You know, I consider anyone who wants to kill innocent people mentally unstable. Why is there no discussion about their mental stability, and instead the conversation is only about radical Islam and international terrorism, trying to link these kids automatically to some international terror plot?
Well, as you know, in America, we've always needed to have a proverbial boogeyman. We've always needed an enemy. During the 70s and 80s in the Cold War, it was the Russian Red Scare. And now in the millennial age, it's become the Green Muslim Scare. And so, you know, a lot of it is based on Americans' perceptions of what's going on. If they don't know about, you know, a Sikh temple shooting being referred to as an act of domestic terrorism, or if the Newtown, Connecticut school shooting or the Dark Night movie massacre in Colorado are now referred to as domestic terrorism, it shows that there is a disconnect there. You know, a few days before the Tsarnaev brothers were listed as suspects, you know, CNN and other networks erroneously reported that a, quote, dark-skinned male was arrested. Even though this turned out to be false, it shaped the narrative that it was those other guys doing it, and it's not a problem that, you know, white America has as well.
Yes, absolutely. And putting that kind of the preconceived notion out there, kind of the preconditioning almost kind of aids that perception. And a lot of people don't follow up and see if that was later retracted, or they don't know who these people were. And the media, of course, is so quick to criticize Obama, and this is really strange to me, for not hastily declaring it to be an act of terrorism. I mean, as if that really means anything, considering how meaningless the word has become in a post-9/11 world, which, according to them, him not jumping on within minutes of the Boston bombings either makes him a Muslim apologist or a Muslim himself. I mean, what kind of damage does this extreme rhetoric from many talking heads in the media do to just the conversation that we need to be having in this country right now?
Well, you know, Abby, most people are aware that we are currently or have fought 2 wars in predominantly Muslim nations, that most of our foreign policy today dealing with much of the rest of the world revolves around dealing with Muslim nations. And you saw the the whisper campaigns of Barack being some sort of crypto-Muslim Manchurian candidate. You know, whenever somebody says that Barack Obama is a Muslim, I feel like Jerry Seinfeld should pop out and say, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's a slur today. It's an accepted form of otherization. And, you know, that's part of the reason that President Obama has never set foot inside an American mosque, because the minute that he would do so during a political campaign, the right-wingers would point at it and say, look, see, we told you so.
It's unbelievable. But if you take these attacks into account, along with 9/11, you're still more likely to slip and die in the shower than you are to die of a terrorist attack in this country. Of course, that doesn't accompany the narrative of fear driving all of this stuff going on. In fact, the large majority of of terrorist plots in the last decade foiled have been concocted by the FBI. The large majority. I mean, what is this manufacturing of terror doing to really aid and kind of breed this undercurrent of Islamophobia?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of studies have been done that have shown that in the last decade or 2 decades, the vast majority, over 90% of domestic terrorism plots that have been foiled here in the United States were committed by white domestic terrorists. And so, you know, when we hear narratives about, you know, Islamic terrorism being, you know, the sort of existential threat of our time, you know, it's one of the threats. There are a lot of threats out there. You know, a few years ago, there was a 48-year-old white American Tea Party member named Joe Stack who flew his single-engine plane into an IRS building in Austin, Texas. Now, if it was a brown dude who had flown his plane into an IRS building in Austin, Texas, we would have shut down every IRS building in the country. We would have shut down every federal building in the country, and we would have called it what it is, an act of terrorism. But because a right-wing nut named Joe Stack and not Ali Muhammad did something, it's not an act of terrorism. And so this double standard in terms of the term terrorism needs to be called out.
Right, and of course they just said, oh, he's mentally ill, he's mentally unstable, he's not a terrorist. We didn't see the police, militarized, paramilitary troops in the streets.
Because only white people can have mental illnesses.
Right, of course, of course. And also, just omitting the fact that these kids have cited the wars abroad as a motivating factor. Of course, they're zeroing in on being radicalized abroad, coming home with this radical ideology from Russia and all this stuff, really omitting kind of that glaring aspect, hey, blowback, hello? I mean, is this a real concept?
And at the end of the day, you know, these guys were just criminal losers.
They're criminal psychos,
and
yeah.
It's something that obviously is, you know, antithetical to any major religious teaching. And, you know, even the mosque in Boston that the elder one went to kicked him out because he started yelling at them during a Friday sermon that was praising Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So even the Muslim community in Boston had shunned this guy, and therefore he went and he radicalized by himself.
But of course, you still hear people like Bill O'Reilly, and I'm just going to paraphrase this because we don't have time to play it, but he basically said that Muslim Americans should apologize on behalf of whenever these things happen. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, I respond by saying, you know, did white Americans apologize after Timothy McVeigh bombed the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City? And then people say, well, you know, religion was an ideology there. Actually, it was. His co-conspirator, Terry Nichols, was a self-professed member of the Christian Identity Movement. And so why is it that one minority group in America is placed with collective guilt more than any other demographic group in America? If we're going to ask people to apologize for the acts of a few, then we should ask everyone to apologize for the acts of a few. But that's ridiculous because that's a completely un-American principle. It
is. And like you said before, I keep going back to this proverbial boogeyman. I mean, every generation has their own, and really it necessitates these perpetual wars. I mean, you need this proverbial boogeyman for people to be scared of, to dehumanize the enemy, to allow these wars to continue. It really is just a vicious cycle. And unfortunately, what accompanies all of this is this extreme discrimination, the incitement of violence, racial profiling, as you said, a Saudi national, which is odd that they called him that anyway, apprehended, interrogated, and then all these calls now from politicians and pundits like to block Muslim student visas from coming into the country. Is this the worst of it, or do you expect more backlash to come?
I expect more backlash to come. I mean, even in the days following the Boston Marathon bombings, you know, there was a report of a Palestinian Muslim woman who wears the hijab, the headscarf, who was accosted by a white male who started yelling profanities at her, saying, F you Muslims, you did the Boston Marathon bombing. A day after the Boston bombings, there was a man in a New York City mosque who was actually followed by an armed individual who was also yelling out anti-Muslim slurs. And so sadly, this has become part and parcel of what many in the American Muslim community have faced since 9/11. And you know, we're going to probably continue to face it for the foreseeable future.
Well, what can we do? I mean, we're becoming more of a melting pot. Islam's one of the largest growing religions. I mean, what can we do to end this guilt by association? And really, how damaging is this to the cultural fabric of our nation? We have about 30 seconds left.
It's very important, and we need politicians. We need members of the administration. We need brave members of Congress and the Senate to come out and challenge, you know, all these right-wing talking points that are coming out. And until we do so, you know, people like myself are going to have to come out into the media and try to humanize Muslims and let people know that just because somebody commits an act of terror, not all brown people are guilty.
Thank you so much. Arsalan Iftikhar, senior editor for the Islamic Monthly and founder of the MuslimGuy.com.
My pleasure,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.